All right, traders, welcome to today's recap. This is Christian from Tribeca Trade Group, and today is Wednesday, September 19th. Well, a lot to talk about, so I will talk quick, but another, I would say, very intriguing, very interesting day. A whole bunch of stuff going on today. S&P, though, only up 15 basis points, and I'll get into some of those movers. But let's look at the chart first in the S&P. It looks fine, looks great, sitting above all the short-term moving averages. Moving up a little bit of a bob and weave here, but all in all, trend intact. Looks pretty damn good. Nasdaq. Now here's where it gets a little bit more interesting, right? Nasdaq is still above what, the 50-day moving average, but has been kind of flirting with breaking down here. Here's where it's kind of tested a lot, the 50-day moving average, and held, and it's been lingering around here for a while. So we've got a lot of things that are going on this week. We have quadruple witching. I want to talk a little bit about the rotations that we're seeing. It's been pretty fast and furious, and then I'll come back to tech. But small caps, they also finished down on the day, and they also look vulnerable to breaking down a bit. They're right on that 50-day moving average, the purple line here, no separation. They look like they're a little bit vulnerable. You got the yellow line, which is the 5, crossing below the 20. I would say, keep an eye on the small caps here. They look like they're vulnerable. And what has been moving up? So it's really interesting to me. You got Dow stocks ripping to the upside, and we've been seeing calls the last couple days in DIA. So, it's funny because you would look at one of these charts and you would say, oh, this looks great. And then you would look at the other one and you would say, oh, geez, we might be rolling over here. So, it just seems to be the separation that we're getting every day. The VIX right now is at 1175, but the VIX doesn't measure the rotation underneath the hood of the S&P, and I think it's pretty fierce that is going on day to day. And as you could see by looking at the Dow and the small caps and the Russell and the Qs, that it is not a everything goes up market right now. You've got some areas going down and look a little bit vulnerable, and you've got some areas that are picking up to the upside. Right, earlier this week, and if you listen to a couple of my videos, I spent some time talking about defense stock, aerospace and defense stocks, and industrials, which were really strong. Well, that was yesterday's rotation, or the last 2 days' rotation. Although I think a couple of names did pretty decent. Boeing looks a little bit toppy. NSC, which I got out of yesterday, had an inside day. I'm sorry, I'm thinking of LMT. That was a perfect signal, was the VPOC, right? And all along, nice, I think so far. That looks like a bearish engulfing candle. I got out of this swing trade yesterday. All along, I said I was going to get out at this version point of control. So mission accomplished. I was still looking at Raytheon, but I think Raytheon also had a reversal bar today too. So we'll see if that sits and plays around that 200-day moving average. Maybe the trade's not over there, or maybe it is just getting going and had a little bit of a reversal. We'll see. I think you kind of put that one on the shelf for now. But that was yesterday. Today, what was today's rotation? Drum roll. Was the financials, right? Was the banks. So, a group that has not performed well at all. And this has been a little bit of a head scratcher the last couple of days because we've been watching what rates have been doing. Specifically the long curve, the long dated rates, right? I had a question about that on Twitter today, and I was commenting about how well the banks were performing this morning because I did get into JP Morgan, which I will go over that trade, but somebody said, oh, well, they're going to raise rates next week. Like, are you not, no offense to this person, but take a look at what's going on in the long end of the curve, right? That's where the banks make the money, right? They borrow short term and they lend long term, right? So when rates go up on the long side of the curve, that should do well for the banks, right? Very generally speaking. There's a bunch of other factors that affect the banks, but the banks want like a higher sloping yield curve, right? Not a flat or downward sloping. So the move with bonds selling off and rates going up is generally good for the banks. They did not do anything the last couple days. They basically just sat there. Even the regional banks were weak the other day. So what do you do when this happens? I mean, I set a bunch of alerts and I say, hey, maybe these banks are going to get going. That's what I did for JP Morgan. And that's basically what, some of the value that I provide if you're a member of Tribeca Trade Group. When you don't have eyes on everything, that's what I do all day and all night. I set alerts on things and pivot points where I think things could be crucial. So right off the 5-minute bar, I noticed the strength in JP Morgan, something that I've been waiting for. It's been my favorite, or was going to be my go-to bank. And I went right into some October calls today. And I went into I think it was the October 120s, was it? Yeah, October 120 calls. And then what I did at the end of the day was I took these off for $1.05 and I rolled them into January calls. So why did I do that? And this is pretty good use of, a good example of use of options, right? I used the Octobers for a day trade and not for a swing. And I went over this whole concept, which I'm not going to rehash for you, but I went over this whole concept in the trading room today in the midday session, where we kind of go over a little bit of strategy and the day's movers. But once I want to make that a swing trade, I'm not using October options. Those are for day trade, in my opinion. Right? And everything in this video, of course, is for information purposes only, so don't hold me to anything. But the way I trade is October options are for day trades. Or for maybe holding overnight and unwinding in the morning. If I want to swing trade, I'm going out a couple months, at least to November at this point. So that's what I did. Do I think the banks could get going now? I like the option activity today, and I like the momentum that they got today. I like the MACD crossover. So what I did, am I really certain that they're going to get going? No. But I, like I said, I like the momentum. So I'm playing with the house money right now. I'm playing with the profits. I took off that day trade and I entered into about 20% of the day trade, and I put that into January options, and then we'll go from there. How does the whole group look? If you go to XLF, you got that VPOC right ahead of you. I don't know why it keeps clicking off, but it's got to get past that, and we'll see. They were buying calls in all of the money center banks today. The biggest call buying that we saw today was in Goldman, which has been a name that's been gotten absolutely smoked, and Wells Fargo. So I actually drew, if you like channels, this is now outside of this downward channel. If you want to play this for a swing for a couple days, if we go to my option sheet, I could show you the exact options. But they were buying more blocky type orders in Wells Fargo. There was 4,000 of the November calls, 55 calls that went up. Goldman, you could see Goldman, I've got a couple times on my sheet. November call options there as well, and then some short-term stuff. JP Morgan, it was mostly short-term stuff, and a lot of options that already had open interest on there. So those were kind of the more momentum type. Also, of course, BAC and Citigroup also saw calls go up. BAC saw a bunch of ones. I only have one listed here, but the January calls. And Citigroup, which we've actually seen calls now a couple times in for the last 2 weeks. Some big blocks went up about a week ago, and Citigroup also saw some calls in that one too. So that's the rotation of the day into the banks. And then, like I said, it's kind of a zero-sum game. Some names, the Igv Etf, which is software, which has been one of your best performing groups all year long. This is down 1.2% today. So, I think I mentioned at the end of the day that some names in this group didn't look right. They didn't close right, and they had further downside today. So, if you like this group, right, and this has been a very strong group, just give it a little bit of time for the air to come out of it. Another group that I'm watching, which has been, probably your best performing subgroup, is small cap healthcare. Look at all the red bars in here. And it hasn't even come into the 50-day moving average. So I have not done anything with this yet, but it's on my radar, something I would be watching. Salesforce is another name that's on, maybe one more day of a dip, and I'll look to put on a trade in Salesforce. Every time, and also what we normally see is a call buyer come in into weakness in Salesforce. We've not really seen that yet, but I would keep that name on your radar. If it happens to come all the way into the 50-day moving average, I would put, be a big buyer. So anyway, that's a couple of the moves. Also, the Chinese internet names. And also FANG stocks were under pressure today too. So again, it's a bit of a rotation. How long will it last? I don't know. You could also look at growth versus value. I put that out on Twitter earlier. You could look at the difference, the outperformance that's going on right now between value and growth. It's pretty substantial. So it's not just the FANG stocks. It's not just the software names. I think overall, just overall growth, right? You look at Grub, which was down 4.9%. And you could look at about 20 other growth names. And so there's definitely, it's not just tech. So don't let the headline grabbers fool you with FANG stocks being unwound. It's all growth that's being rotated out of. And again, it doesn't mean that it's game over for growth. It just means people are finding value right now in value. Haha. And that this takes place. So once the growth names become cheap again, or a little bit cheaper, money will probably rotate back in. So next topic that I wanted to talk about was probably just a little bit of option activity. What else did we see today? Again, the financials were the heart of the option buying today. Also, the energy. Energy continues to see some call buying here and there. I think the best signal out of the group was AR, which we saw just AR calls. I had to get myself familiar with this name, but it went from basically where they started buying calls in here all the way up to $20. So this name has been a ripper. A few other names that saw some calls. ESV, kind of at the end of the day, which I don't really like when they buy calls on the highs and after a move, but this one, I think Halliburton saw a little bit of calls today. Halliburton has been moving up since it did this big gap low. So you have to ask yourself too, with a lot of these names like GDX, which was up 1 point, so this was amongst the performers. Is this just basically a bounce from the lows? Because we are seeing that, of course, in emerging markets as well, big bounce from the lows. But once we've gotten the bounce, which we have, is this going to be a change in trend, or was this just a trade? Right, a change in trend, meaning more of an investment type trade that you could put on, or was it just a bounce? So we don't know that yet, and we'll have to keep an eye on things like emerging markets and gold miners, and and some of the energy stocks as well, so on and so forth. One trade that I thought was pretty interesting today, so I'll just go through a couple trades, a couple other trades that were not involved in the banks and energy, which I think were the two big themes of the day, was EW. Why do I think this is interesting? A little bit of a concept of relative strength, right? This is a medical device company. Well, what did medical devices do today? The IHI ETF was down 30 basis points today, so it was an underperformer today. Also, XHE, which was medical equipment, down 0.75%. Go back to Edward Life Sciences. What did that do today? Up 1.9%. So, and we've seen aggressive call buying twice this week. I like this name, and I like what it's doing right here. So I think that's a really good example of what relative strength is, and a name that's doing very well. I mentioned that there's been Dow calls the last couple days. ESV, I covered that one. EW, AAXN saw some January calls go up. This is a name that's come into the 200-day move, not the 200, but the top of value. Maybe keep an eye on that name. FireEye saw some calls earlier today, short-dated calls. If we go further down, I talked about Goldman already. SWK saw some calls. That name's at the 200-day moving average. We'll see what it does there. I think it's already moved up decently, even though there was calls that went up twice today. Tesla saw some calls. I think it took off after those calls. So I think that's the type of day trade momentum call buyer. I mentioned Wells as well. So I guess that's it. I thought there was one other trade that I had in here, but I think that's enough. Video is 15 minutes long, and that's enough for one day. Guys, have a great night. See you tomorrow.